This video is going to begin our discussion of Neolithic architecture in Western Europe. So we have our map on the screen here, circled in yellow on the map, the United Kingdom, Ireland. That is where we're going to focus for the Neolithic period in Western Europe. And we're going to look at the two structures pictured on the left here. At the top, we have Newgrange. At the bottom, we have Stonehenge. Now, for the Neolithic period, we looked at Çatalhöyük, which is in modern-day Turkey, and the architecture we see there is very different than the architecture we see in Western Europe. Remember, Çatalhöyük was really a community-based structure. There were shared walls. It was mostly residential. Everyone lived together within that architectural space. We didn't talk about divisions in social hierarchy at all. And the main building material was mud brick, which people had to repair regularly, take care of regularly, and that also created an interdependence on one another because you had the shared walls. Things are very different in Western Europe. So the transition from hunter-gatherer societies to agricultural groups is slower in Western Europe. And then the social hierarchy is different. We get a social hierarchy that is very strict. There is a priest king at the top. So there's a leader whose authority is based in his religious importance. He is both what we would consider a king, but also a priest. We use the term priest king today. That's a contemporary term that we use to describe this figure. So we see a strict social hierarchy, and that dictates the architecture that we see. What we also see that is different is building material. The main building material that we're going to look at in Western Europe is stone. Okay, so with this video, we are going to look at Newgrange. Let me bring up a nice large image of Newgrange here. So in this photo, we're looking down. This is an aerial shot of Newgrange. We have the identification info up all the way on the right side. So the name of the structure, Newgrange, its location, County Meath, Ireland, the period style, Neolithic period, and then the date, circa 3100 BCE. What you'll also see on the screen here is definitions. So definitions are always included at the bottom of the Canvas page, but also I often incorporate them into lectures as well. So our definition that's important here is megalith, which is large stones or boulders used in prehistoric architecture. One thing I want to emphasize about megalith as a definition is it's a term that's restricted by time period. It's referring to large stones or boulders in the prehistoric period. So we use that term when we're talking about Newgrange. We will use it when we are talking about Stonehenge. We will not use it when we move out of the prehistoric period. When we're looking at large stone constructions, say by the ancient Egyptians, those are not megaliths because we're no longer in the prehistoric period. So do make that note. That's an important note in terms of using proper vocabulary. All right, back to Newgrange. Okay, we're looking down at the structure. We have a circular structure. The white you can see in the image is stone, and then we have grass on top. That was actually added later, but still very, very early on in Newgrange's life. Now, Newgrange has been restored. It is a tourist destination today, so it definitely is cleaned up as compared to when it was, we'll say, rediscovered by archaeologists. All right, function of Newgrange. This is a communal grave. So it's a tomb. It's a circular tomb. There is an entryway. I will circle it right here. There's the entryway. They've added a modern day stairs for people visiting today. And there's a internal passageway that goes back from here to an internal chamber relatively at the center of Newgrange. Now, we should also think of this as a type of tomb. There are many of these circular communal graves throughout Ireland. Newgrange is the example of them we're going to look at, but there's over 500 of sites like this documented across Ireland. So this was a type of structure that was built in the Neolithic period in Ireland. Let me give you some dimensions here. So at its highest point, Newgrange is 32 feet in height, and the diameter, cutting the circular shape in half, it's just over 260 feet in diameter. Okay, so let's see here. Let me show you the entrance. So we're going to go down to the entryway. Here is the entrance here into Newgrange. And so you can see it's a stone entrance. So we have a large megalith right in front of the image here with those spiral designs. It has been cleaned up and restored, but you get a sense of what this would have originally looked like. Now there's a small entryway. Small entryway is right here. And then above the small entryway, we have an opening. That is called a transom. A transom is an opening above a door for light and door ventilation. Transom is a term we still use today in architecture. So it's just a term that applies to this opening. Okay, so let me just show you to some people in this shot to give you a sense of scale here. Okay, here's just a tourist photo with people in it. So you can see the doorway, it's not huge, right? Today, visiting people have to bow down to get in. It's about 5 feet in height, and it's a very tight interior space. Here is a view from the interior, not a high quality shot, but you can see you have just earth on the ground there. On the walls on either side, those are the megaliths. Those are the very large stones. So it's a very narrow internal passageway. It leads to a burial chamber. And let me show some diagrams so we can see the inside since it's so very small. Okay, let me draw on here a minute. Here is our entryway all the way on the left here. The passage that I was just showing the photos of, that is this area that I'm highlighting here. And then this is the chamber at the end where the graves are. And where it's labeled roof box, that is the transom. So that is that opening above the doorway. Okay. Newgrange, this is an example of a passage grave. And so a passage grave, this is a prehistoric tomb with a long stone corridor leading to covered burial chambers. That's a perfect description of what we have at Newgrange. That long corridor, with the stones on either side, it's just over 60 feet in length, so it's quite long, and it leads into a domed burial chamber. Now, the domed burial chamber, if we look down here, under the dome, you have, let me draw my little arrow there. Okay, under the dome, we have 3 arms of the chamber. So it's almost, interior is like an elongated cross in shape. And so in each of those little arms, archaeologists have found remains. Now, for the most part, these are cremated remains. Sometimes they're not cremated remains. But importantly, this was not a burial chamber for just anybody. Remember, going back to the beginning of this video, this was a society structured under a strict social hierarchy with priest kings. Newgrange was the communal grave for the priest kings. So you had to be a ruler, an elite in this society to have your remains placed within Newgrange. So with that context, right, one, this becomes a symbol of power, of status, right? That you're a place to rest after you pass away. Here, it dictates your importance to the community, your power within the community for the rest of your life. Also, you know, this is a megalith structure. Let me clear this out. It took lots of manpower to build, right? It's large, it's stone. This wasn't just built by the priest kings. This was built for the priest kings by their communities. So it shows the power and importance they had, the control the priest kings had over their communities. If we compare this to Çatalhöyük, it's so different, right? Çatalhöyük was community-based. People were working together. Newgrange celebrates the elite. It celebrates the rulers in the community. Now, this also, its layout has a tie to religious beliefs. So if we go back for a second to our transom, that opening has a very important purpose here. And so let me go to another diagram. So in this diagram, you can see the sun all the way on the left. You can see the rays of the sun going here. They pass through the transom. Here's the transom, drawing my little arrow. They pass through there. They go all the way down the chamber and they illuminate the center here where the graves are. And you can see that the ground of the corridor curves up, right? It's not perfectly straight. On the day of the winter solstice, which is the shortest day, longest night of the year, when the sun rises, its light perfectly aligns with that transom. It goes, light floods down the corridor and illuminates the burial chamber. This is the only time of the year this happens, and this is not by coincidence. This was planned. Now, what we can take away from this is, one, the winter solstice was a very important day to the people who built Newgrange. We suspect it was like their new year, that it celebrated rebirth, nature's rebirth, and it was connected to this idea of renewed life, that the winter was coming to an end, there'd be new crops, new life in terms of animal life, human life. And so you have that idea of rebirth and renewal tied into it. It's possible that then this connection with the sun and these ideas of renewal and rebirth going into the burial chamber where the priest kings were remained, it could tie into ideas of reincarnation. It could tie into ideas of the victory of life over death, that even though the priest kings have passed away, life continues, the community continues. But of course, we don't know for sure because we cannot sit down and talk to the people who built Newgrange. But clearly it was important. Clearly it does tie into ideas about death and life. And so it's just interpreting that to the best of our knowledge. Now, let me show you just a few more interior shots, since we've been looking mostly at diagrams. Here's that hallway again. This photo is actually taken on the winter solstice. And so you see this bright light up there. That is the transom opening. So the sun flooding in, illuminating the whole corridor here. If we turn around in this spot, we're looking into the burial chamber, and you can see the corbel dome, and then all of the megalith stone. These spiral patterns that you see, we saw some on the outside of this, the large megalith by the doorway. We see them on the interior as well. We don't know the meaning of this, to be honest. we clearly, there's an important meaning because they took the time to carve these into the stone, and particularly some of the stones on the exterior are highly decorative, but the symbolism has been lost. So we don't know how to interpret this besides that it had a very important meaning to those who put this on Newgrange. Okay, now we're gonna look up at the dome. Here's the dome. It's what we call a corbel dome. It's not a true dome. We will look at true domes in this class, but not for a little while. A corbel dome is made with a corbel arch. And so here's an example of a corbel arch. A corbel arch is an arch that, it's like you make it out of Legos. You don't have any true, it's not a true arch. There isn't a true curve. And so you're taking rectangular stones and stacking them closer and closer and closer to one another until you reach a top and you make this domed or arched shape. We'll see corbel arches and corbel domes a lot, particularly in the early parts of this semester. All right, so a couple more things just to wrap up Newgrange. We know this was a communal grave. We are looking at Newgrange as an example of these types of communal graves for priest kings because there are over 500 of these documented across Ireland. Another aspect of these to consider is placement. These communal graves built out of megalith stones are typically up on hillsides. And so you can see a little bit of the height in this, you get a sense of the rolling hills in this shot. A lot of the surrounding area has been turned into farm and grazing land. You can see the little sheep in this photo. So it's been worked, the land has been worked. But when the communities, Neolithic communities were building these, not only did they serve as graves, but they also served as territorial markers. The idea was you would build one of these graves at the highest part of your land, your territory, as a community. And so it became a marker. So it looked over your territory. If other tribes arrived, they would know that was someone's territory. So it became a marker of territory, that someone was in control of that area. So that's another important way to tie this in. It really, in its role as being a tomb for the priest kings, it also served a role in identity of the community, that this was a monumental structure that they built to represent them, represent their beliefs, and represent their territory. All right, that is Newgrange, and that brings an end to this video.